of East Africa. So the partitioning of East Africa was interestingly not done in East Africa but in Europe. So Africans were not, actual African territories were not divided in Africa. They were instead divided in Europe. So European countries started dividing African territories actually when they are in Europe during the Bahrain Conference. When you hear Bahrain, that is in German. So they settled in German, and it's where they divided African territories from. So the process began after the Chancellor of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, calling for Bahrain Congress in 1884, and this is where much of the paperwork was done. So the scramble for and partitioning of African territories began on paper, and later on it was applied physically onto ground during the struggle. So the process of partition went through 3 main stages. That's why I've told you that the partitioning of Africa began on paper in the Bahrain Conference, whereby the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called all those European countries that were so much interested in colonialism, and they agreed on how they were going to divide African territories in peace, and they agreed on what to do after taking over African territories. So this took place in 3 phases. We had the Bahrain Conference of 1884 to 1885, and we had the first Anglo-German Agreement of 1886. Then we had the second Anglo-German Agreement of 1890. Particularly, this was known as the Heligoland Treaty. So the Germans signed an agreement with Britain in the first place, that is in 1886, and at the same time they signed agreements with the British in 1890 in what we call the Heligoland Treaty. So let us look at the Bahrain Conference. Let us look at the Bahrain Conference, and we see what happened during this conference in 1884 to 1885. So this conference was called by Otto von Bismarck. They call him Prince Otto von Bismarck, or the German Chancellor. The conference came up with the following guidelines. So they had the guidelines that were guiding them during the conference. No European power was to ally with any African country to make sure that there is colonialism, or to foster colonialism. So that is one of the terms that the Bahrain Conference had. It was also agreed that all European powers should eliminate slave trade in their colonies. So it was agreed that if you colonize Uganda, make sure that Uganda does not involve any slave trade anymore. If you colonize Kenya, make sure that Kenya is not a victim of slave trade. If you colonize Congo, likewise other European colonies that they had grabbed from Africans. So that was another term, that once you colonize a territory, make sure that there is no slave trade. Each European country had to effectively occupy its colony by developing it altogether. So all European countries, it was now their responsibility to make sure that all the conquered areas are developed or civilized. It was also agreed that the paper map of East Africa should be drawn to ease the partition. So they say that all European countries that had colonized African society or territories, they had to draw or sketch maps, and these maps had to be actually compiled together to make sure that now partitioning is clearly done, to ensure that there is no collusion by European powers. It was also agreed that in case a colonial power wanted to extend its influence, it had to first inform other European countries to avoid clash and misunderstandings. That if you are to expand a colony that you had conquered, you have to first alert other European powers so that you don't collide at any moment. That's why you are seeing when Britain extended her colonies towards Sudan in an area called Fashoda Sandbars, that is in 1895. Britain informed France that do not come closer. I'm the one in the area. So France had also to leave Fashoda without colliding with, actually without fighting with Britain, because the terms of the agreement that is in Bahrain were saying that you should alert your neighbor or you should alert other European powers so that you don't clash. So France had to shift her weapons and her soldiers and her base to go to other areas. That's why France ended up going to Maghreb region. Maghreb region is a region that is comprised of Algeria, it was comprised of Tunisia, it was comprising of Morocco, and France went to those areas, and it's where France compensated her. So Congo was to be left to Belgium. It was a must. They were told when they are in the conference that Congo was to be left for Belgium, while France was to be compensated in Western Africa or in West Africa. So France had to go in West Africa and occupy all the areas that she wanted without being stopped. And Belgium, Belgium was given a mandate to go and occupy Congo. That's why when France went in Congo, Belgium reminded her of the terms and the conditions of the Berlin Congress. Leopold told France, please, the Congress told us, or the conference, while in the conference, we agreed that Belgium is the one having full control over Congo. So, no need of you coming even close to Congo. France had refused to leave the western, the southern, the northern parts of Congo. So France, because of revising the terms of the conference, had to shift her goods to go to other areas. We have the conference accordingly gave Germany and Britain the free hand to come to East Africa. That's why if you look at East African countries, many of them were taken by Britain and Germany. Why? It is from the Berlin Congress that the Germans and the British were told, now you are free to partition, you are free to share, you are free to exchange territories in East Africa. Still we have the Berlin Congress. Let us first increase here on the size of our work so that we can clearly see. The Berlin Congress also gave other European powers the mandate to civilize, to do whatever they wanted in Africa. So we have the effects or the roles of the conference in the partitioning of East Africa. The Berlin Conference increased the rivalry among European powers, i.e., they became more hungry for colonies. So this is the time when European powers started now to fight. This is now the time when European powers started to struggle. This is now when European powers began to highly fight for African territories. Are we together? So European powers started to fight for more territories after the Berlin Congress. It gave them a lot of now pressure. It increased the love. It increased the hunger in them to get as many territories as possible to satisfy themselves. So the Berlin Conference particularly divided East Africa among the Germans, the British, hence doing away with the independence of East African territories. So it led to the loss of African independence to European powers after giving the European powers mandate authority to colonize African territories by all means. So we have the Berlin Conference helped in eradicating slave trade in East Africa, leading to the introduction of legitimate trade. So still, the Berlin Conference helped in stopping slave trade in Africa, and later on gave to the rise of what we call cash crop growing. This is the through legitimate trade. So Africans at least got a smile after seeing now slave trade had ended. Now they had embarked on what we call legitimate trade. So the conference stimulated the development of infrastructures in East Africa. The 1914 Uganda Leire, the hospitals were established, roads were established, schools were established. All these helped East Africa to mature or to develop, and the other European countries made their work easy through these infrastructures that they set. Still, the Bahraini Conference also speeded up what we call colonization process in East Africa. European powers started sending missionaries, explorers, and traders in East Africa due to the access of East Africa. So the Bahraini Conference now is boosted the process of colonization, since now it was since now they were free to come and penetrate into East Africa to do whatever they wanted in East Africa after them being given a pushing factor, that is the Bahrain Conference, the mandate. So the conference still led to the influx of the white settlers, because it gave them permission to whites to start coming to East Africa. The word influx, that is, it gave them the mandate to come, to enter into East Africa. So the Bahraini Conference gave them the mandate to enter into East Africa. So many of the whites increased in East Africa after the Bahraini Conference. So the Bahraini Conference at the same time stimulated the formation of chartered companies, the Ibeco, the Imperial British East African Company, and the GEICO, the German East African Company, which exploited the African resources. At the end of the day, Africans were exploited, and they lost value, they lost control over their minerals, leaving them poor, starving, displaced. More so, those who had stayed in areas with minerals, they are displaced by the European powers. So the conference also prevented any cooperation between European powers and any African state. So cooperation between European powers with African states was prevented. So this was also another impact. Lastly, the conference totally neglected the Africans, yet what was going to be decided was to affect Africans and their grandchildren. So the conference did not give Africans any opportunity to be part of the decision making, and later role Africans just saw the Europeans acting, but they were not given a chance to accept or to deny. Lastly, the Bahraini Conference also neglected the tribal boundaries. So some tribes like the Somali and the Luo, those are in Kenya and Uganda, and this created this unit among Africans. So denial of Africans' rights to consider their tribal boundaries created this unit in Africa, and later all resulted into African uprisings, which caused a lot of setbacks in terms of economy, in terms of development, and led loss of lives among the Africans. So I beg to submit from here with the effects of the Bahraini Congress. When we come back, we shall look at the first Anglo-Germany we shall look at the Anglo-Germany conflicts and how were they later on solved.